Hello, this is the Big Find Cases. Nice to see you here. We get a lot of letters, but this one starts like a cheap trash unit and turns into something that feels planned. Names and exact location are removed at the writer's request. Here's the letter. I'm writing as an older guy who had no business bidding on another unit, but we were out of options. We're on a fixed income, and we got burned a few months back by a company that promised they'd multiply our savings. Long story short, we didn't gain anything. We spent weeks fighting to stop the bleeding. By the time it ended, we were staring at overdue bills and the kind of decisions that make your chest feel tight. Groceries or meds, heat or car insurance. My wife and I started watching storage videos at night, mostly to keep our minds off the stress. We tried a couple small units before, and honestly, it was a losing game. Dump fees, rotten furniture, junk nobody wanted. Still, when a local facility ran a clearance auction, cheap units, quick turnover, take it all. We told ourselves one last try. Not a fantasy, just one chance to climb out of the hole. The listing photo for this unit looked awful, except for one thing. In the very back, under a dirty tarp, there was a big square shape, clean edges, too solid to be a couch, too tall to be a box. It didn't look random, it looked hidden. Auction night, I bid and got outbid at the last second. I shut the laptop, irritated, told my wife it wasn't meant to be. Next morning, I wake up to an email. The other bidder didn't pay. The unit rolled to me. That should have felt lucky. Instead, it felt like someone pushed a door open and wanted us to walk through first. We drove out that afternoon. The staff had the door cut and ready, and when we walked up, a couple younger employees started grinning like they already knew how this would go. One of them said, "You're going to need a shovel," and the other laughed. Not friendly, more like they were watching a prank. We paid, got our key, and I told my wife, "We clear it fast. We don't argue, we don't get attached." The door rolled up and the smell hit first. Sour plastic, old pantry, something stale like a basement. Inside were barrels. Big blue plastic drums, the industrial kind. Not two or three. A whole line of them along both walls and stacked toward the back. I counted 15 before I stopped counting. Every barrel had a marker label like it was trying to look harmless. Rags, toys, clothes, holiday, rice. Like somebody wanted the unit to scream, "Worthless," from 10 feet away. The employees laughed again. "Told you." One said, like we were the entertainment. We started anyway. Gloves on. We popped the first drum. Stuffed animals and broken plastic dolls that smelled like attic. Second drum. Ripped jackets, mismatched shoes, junk you couldn't donate. Third drum. Pennies. I'm not kidding. A torn bag of pennies that spilled everywhere like someone dumped a piggy bank into a barrel and forgot it. My wife looked at me like, "We're done, right?" And I almost said yes. Then we got to the one labeled rice. It was packed to the lid with dry rice. Heavy, messy, useless. I tipped it to slide it onto a dolly, and the drum slipped. It fell off the lip of the unit, hit the concrete, and rice exploded across the floor like a wave. I was already bending down to sweep it up when something flashed in the spill. Not a coin, not a button. Gold. I froze, dropped to my knees, and started digging through rice with both hands like I'd lost a ring in sand. My wife grabbed the broom and started pushing rice into a pile. And that's when we saw it. Small jewelry pouches sealed in plastic, taped to the inside wall of the barrel, hidden behind a rice line where you'd never notice unless the whole thing dumped out. Whoever did this didn't store stuff. They planted it. I opened one pouch and my fingers went cold. A heavy chain. Real weight. Another pouch had a ring with stones that caught light, even in that dusty unit. I looked up at my wife, and she wasn't smiling. She was pale, because the scary thought hit us at the same time. If one barrel was camouflage, then every barrel was a question, and we had 14 left to open. We kept going because once you've seen gold in a pile of rice, you can't just shut the door and pretend it didn't happen. I did the first smart thing I've done in months. I took my phone out, snapped pictures of the unit number, the open drums, and that rice spill with the pouches showing. Then I texted them to my wife, so there was a timestamp trail. Not because I'm trying to be a hero, but because I could already feel the story turning into one of those situations where everyone suddenly has an opinion about what belongs to who. We dragged the rice drum back inside and set the jewelry pouches on a moving blanket, away from the mess. I told my wife, one drum at a time, no dumping, no surprises. She nodded, but her hands were shaking. The next drum we opened was labeled rags. It was exactly that. Old towels, cut-up shirts, grease-stained cloth bundled with twine. It smelled like wet laundry left too long. We lifted one bundle and something clinked inside. Too clean a sound for fabric. I cut the twine, unfolded the rags, and found a small hard case, the kind you'd carry a camera lens in. Inside, 2 watches wrapped in microfiber cloth like somebody cared about scratches. One had a scratched-up face, but the back had an engraving and a serial number. The other one was heavy, gold-toned, and felt like it had no business being in a drum of trash. My wife whispered, "This isn't random." And that's when I noticed the pattern. The top layer was always disgusting, always believable. But the weight wasn't matching what we were seeing. These barrels weren't full of junk. They were staged. We rolled the next one forward, toys. It was packed with cheap plastic, Happy Meal junk, broken action figures. I was ready to call it a dud until my hand hit something flat and rigid at the bottom. We dug down and pulled out a sealed plastic sleeve, taped tight and double-bagged like it was going through a flood. Inside was a stack of trading cards and hard cases, each one labeled with tiny handwriting. Year, player, grade. I'm not a collector, but even I know people don't store real cards under broken dolls unless they're trying to hide them from someone. We set that aside, and my wife looked toward the back of the unit where the barrels were stacked tighter. "How many more do we have to open before we hit whatever they were really hiding?" she asked. Before I could answer, the facility manager came walking over with a clipboard, acting casual like he just happened to be doing rounds. He stopped a little too close to the doorway and peered inside without asking. His eyes landed on the open rice barrel, then on the blanket where we'd placed the pouches. His face didn't change much, but his tone did. "Everything going okay in here?" he asked. I kept my voice even, just cleaning it out. He nodded slowly, like he was doing math. "If you find anything unusual, you can always let the office know. Sometimes people leave hazardous stuff." Hazardous. That word felt like a hook under my ribs. Because he wasn't looking for needles or chemicals. He was looking at our blanket. He lingered another second, then stepped away, and I watched him go all the way back to the office without turning around once. My wife said, "He's going to come back." So we changed gears. We stopped laying things out in the open. We put the pouches and watches into a plain cardboard box, taped it shut, and slid it into the trunk of our car like we were hiding groceries. Then we went back into the unit like nothing happened, just an old couple hauling trash. The next barrel was labeled clothes. It looked like a total loss, musty jeans, stained sweaters. But halfway down we found the real reason it was so heavy. Inside a trash bag, under the clothes, were 2 thick envelopes wrapped in duct tape. I cut one open and felt my stomach drop. Cash, not a couple bills. Stacks, old-looking 20s and hundreds banded together like someone had counted them carefully and then panicked. My wife's eyes went wide and she mouthed no, because cash in a storage unit doesn't feel like a blessing. It feels like a problem that hasn't found you yet. We didn't count it there. I shoved it back into the envelope, taped it shut, and we both turned at the same time because a shadow crossed the doorway. One of the employees, the one who'd been laughing earlier, was standing there with his phone in his hand, pretending to scroll, but his camera lens was pointed straight at us. He looked up and smiled like we were friends. "Y'all find anything good?" I didn't smile back. "Just trash." He held my gaze for a beat too long, then said, real quiet, "That unit's been a headache for years." Then he walked off toward the office, still holding his phone like it weighed nothing. My wife grabbed my sleeve and whispered, "He knows." And standing there with 14 barrels left, a trunk that now held jewelry and watches, and a taped envelope of cash hidden under clothes, I realized something that made my skin go cold. We weren't just cleaning out a unit anymore. We were opening somebody's hiding place, one barrel at a time. After that, we stopped pretending this was just a dirty unit. We closed the door, rolled it down halfway, and worked like we were in a kitchen during a storm, quiet, fast, and methodical. My wife stayed by the entrance watching the corridor, and I dragged the barrels into a single line so we could track what we'd touched and what we hadn't. I wrote the barrel labels down on the back of an old receipt and numbered them with a marker, because the minute someone tries to twist a story, your memory turns into sand. The next 2 barrels try to fool us again. One was packed with those little foam packing peanuts and broken picture frames, the kind of mess that explodes everywhere the second you lift the lid. But buried under the frames was a sealed electronics box, still shrink-wrapped, high-end headphones and a tablet, both brand new. tucked inside trash like a disguise. Another barrel was full of metal junk, bent rods and random brackets, but the bottom was lined with taped PVC tubes. When I twisted one open, a tight roll of bills slid out like it had been loaded with a ramrod. Not life-changing money by itself, but enough to confirm someone had been building a hideout, not a storage unit. We kept finding the same trick: disgusting on top, valuable underneath. Jewelry in a cereal bag, coins in a sealed coffee can, a little velvet pouch pushed inside a stuffed animal like a joke that wasn't funny. By the time we got through half the barrels, my wife looked at me and said, "This feels like somebody laundering their life through garbage." That's when the headache came back. We heard the office door slam, then footsteps moving too fast for a casual walk. The manager showed up with a laughing employee and another guy I hadn't seen before. The manager didn't even try to sound friendly this time. He pointed at the barrels and said, "We may have an issue with this unit. There's been a paperwork mix-up." I felt my stomach drop, but I kept my voice steady. "A mix-up how?" He held up a clipboard and started talking in circles. Something about a wrong unit number. Something about an internal audit. Something about needing to pause removal while they checked a file. Meanwhile, the laughing employee kept looking past us toward my car, like he could see through metal. Then the one decent thing that happened that day happened. A younger worker, the quiet one who'd been sweeping earlier, walked up behind them and said, plain as day, "That's not true. They won it yesterday. I saw the invoice print. You can pull it up." The manager shot him a look that could have frozen water. The kid didn't flinch. He just repeated it, calmer. "Pull up the invoice." I pulled my phone out and opened the timestamp photos. The unit number, the sealed barrels, the first rice spill, the auction confirmation email. I held the screen up like I was showing a cop my license. "If there's a problem," I said, "we can call the sheriff non-emergency and sort it out right here." The word sheriff did something to the whole group. The manager's shoulders tightened, and the laughing employee suddenly found the floor fascinating. The manager cleared his throat, flipped his clipboard like it might save him, and said, "Let me double check. Maybe I'm thinking of another unit." Then he walked off toward the office without another word. When they were gone, the quiet worker stayed behind for a second and leaned in just enough to whisper, "Don't leave the good stuff out. People talk." That was all. No drama. Just truth. We didn't sleep much that night. We moved the obvious valuables to a safe deposit box first thing in the morning, because I'm old enough to know you don't hide real value in your sock drawer and call a plan. We also called the facility from the parking lot and asked for the prior tenant's contact info through the proper process. They claimed they didn't have anything current, which didn't surprise me at all. After that, we did the boring, honest part. We took the watches to a reputable jeweler who logged serial numbers and photographed everything in front of us. We took the collectible coins to a dealer who tested them and wrote a statement. The sealed electronics went to a local reseller who checked model numbers and paid a fair price. And the cash, every roll, every envelope, we counted on camera at the bank and deposited, because if anyone ever asks, I want my story to match a paper trail, not my imagination. When it finally settled, the numbers still didn't feel real. Between the jewelry, the watches, the coins, the electronics, and what the dealers paid for the oddities we couldn't even identify at first, we cleared enough to wipe out the mess that had been choking us for years. The best part wasn't the money itself. It was my wife exhaling at the kitchen table like her ribs finally had room. We fixed the car we'd been nursing along. We paid the medical bills we'd been dodging. We put a little aside so the next surprise doesn't knock us flat. And that barrel of rice. I kept a handful in a jar on the shelf in my garage. Not because it's sentimental, but because it reminds me how close we were walking away on the first hour when all we saw was filth. Somebody tried to hide a fortune in plain sight by making it look worthless. The only reason it worked for them as long as it did is because most people don't have the patience to dig through the ugly part. We did. I'm not gonna lie, the paperwork mix-up right after the fines made my stomach drop. If you want more letters like this, real people, real stakes, and that moment where everything flips, hit like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments what you would have done when the manager showed up at the door.